Have you ever stood near an old waterfront and felt something was off? Not just in the stone beneath your feet, but in the silence that surrounds it? In cities across Europe and beyond, there are stairways that descend into the water, huge, imposing, carved from granite, wide enough to drive a cart down, and built with a precision that rivals modern engineering. And yet, no one can say with certainty what ships ever used them. The records are silent, the photos have been retouched, and the official explanations never seem to match the scale of the stone. This is not just one city's oddity. This is the beginning of a deeper mystery. Before we go further, take a moment to support this investigation. If you find this mystery compelling, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this. Comment below with the country you're watching from and what time it is right now where you are. We love seeing how far this community reaches. And if this stairway into silence makes you feel something, curiosity, unease, wonder, share the video with someone else who needs to see it. Let's unravel this together. If you've made it this far, type "I see the pattern" in the comments so we know you've unlocked the title's hidden question. Take Odessa. The year is 1887. A photographer sets up his tripod overlooking the harbor. In the frame, the legendary staircase descends 200 granite steps into the Black Sea. Each block is cut so cleanly that a knife couldn't slip between them. Mooring rings the size of a man's head are embedded deep into the granite. He takes the shot. But when the photograph is developed, something strange emerges. At the bottom of the steps, shadows. Not natural shadows, but dark, angular forms, like metal structures sitting just out of the water. They don't look like boats. They don't look like anything we know. And then, in a second version of the same photograph, the shadows are gone, not faded, removed. Clean white water reflects the sky. Under magnification, the brush strokes become visible. Someone painted over the past. The official story says the staircase is decorative, a promenade, built for the people to admire the view, but the size of it argues back. These stairs aren't for strolling, they're for bearing weight. Tons of it. And the mooring rings, not made for small craft or fishing boats. They're thick enough to hold cables wider than your arm. The conclusion arrives on its own. Uninvited. Something massive docked here. But if that's true, then what was it? Why is there no name? And why would someone go to such lengths to erase it from the record? These questions don't stay anchored in Odessa. They ripple outward. In St. Petersburg, staircases plunge into the Neva River at angles too steep for wagons, too wide for pedestrians. The blocks measure in meters, not feet. A surveyor's journal from 1902 mentions that the stair width is excessive and notes uncertainty about their original purpose. That line is later crossed out and replaced with one word: promenade. The evidence wasn't clarified. It was rewritten. And rewriting, we begin to see, is the quiet twin of erasure. What kind of civilization builds something so massive, so enduring, then leaves behind no clear memory of what it was for? We're told it's all just aesthetics, old infrastructure, quaint civic planning, but look closer. These stairways weren't just stone. They were mechanisms. They were engineered. Moving granite blocks of this scale requires cranes, winches, and precise tools. Cutting them so perfectly takes more than chisels. It takes knowledge of pressure and load-bearing capacity. These weren't haphazard constructions. They were deliberate, technical, and built with foresight. So, who built them? And why are they no longer in use? In Alexandria, a similar stairway descends into the Mediterranean. It cuts through what used to be open land, predating nearby buildings by decades. The construction date is marked as 1820, but a French engineer's survey from 1798 already describes the stairway as ancient and without known origin. How could something be ancient before it was supposedly built? No explanation is offered. No contradiction is addressed. It is simply filed away, quiet and unanswered. In Mumbai, a granite platform juts out from the shore. British records call it a landing stage, but its scale makes no sense. It's built of non-local stone, too wide, too high, and incompatible with the draft of any ship in the colonial fleet. A shipping log from 1871 simply says, "Structure unsuitable for current craft." It is marked for modification. That modification never comes. The story begins to solidify. This is not a question of isolated architectural oddities. This is a pattern, a language of stone repeating itself across continents. Stairways that look more like infrastructure for heavy industry than scenic river walks. Platforms placed at odd heights. Mooring rings rusted in place. Frozen in a past no one can quite recall. Carved grooves in the stone too regular, too exacting to be decorative. What's more, there are signs that something used to be there, something that cast shadows, left marks, occupied space, and was later removed, not just physically but photographically, archivally, ideologically. Why? Because it did not match the accepted timeline? Because it did not fit the story we are meant to believe? This is where the unease creeps in. Architecture doesn't lie. Stone doesn't care about theory. Measurements don't shift with the wind. If these structures were purely ornamental, why the scale? Why the function? Why the deletion? There's a kind of silence that speaks volumes. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of suppression. What follows is not just an inquiry into architecture, it is an investigation into memory, into who gets to decide what we remember, what we forget, and what we're never even allowed to question. These stairs are more than stone. They are the footprints of a forgotten presence. Something once docked here. Something that required more than rope and sail. Something that vanished. And with it, a chapter of human history so thoroughly erased. All that remains are these impossible stairs. Once you notice it, you start seeing it everywhere. The stairs in Odessa, the granite platforms in Alexandria, they are not architectural anomalies. They are part of a repeating pattern, a silent language carved into stone. And it does not stop with a few scattered cities. From Europe to Asia, from Africa to the Americas, these massive waterfront stairways appear again and again, built on scales that dwarf human proportions, in locations where no known fleet required such size, and often made of materials that had to be brought in from afar. The pattern does not hide. It waits, in plain sight, beneath the feet of those who no longer ask what they are walking on. In St. Petersburg, the granite stairs along the Neva River are so wide and steep that they defy easy explanation. Nearly 3 meters across, the steps drop at a dangerous incline, impractical for wagons, uncomfortable for people. They are flanked by mooring rings large enough for shipping cables thicker than a man's leg. A city planner's notebook from the early 20th century calls their size excessive for foot traffic and marks the original purpose as unclear. But that note is later crossed out. A new one is written beside it, promenade. The real answer is erased not by fire or flood, but by pencil. In Alexandria, the stonework is already old by the time the first maps mark it. A French engineer traveling with Napoleon's forces in 1798 calls it ancient, noting that its geometry does not align with modern needs. And yet, in 1820, it appears on official documents as newly constructed. The contradiction is never addressed. In Mumbai, a trading post long forgotten sits beside a wide granite platform, raised above the sea and far larger than any colonial dock. British ledgers describe it as a landing stage, but quietly acknowledge that it does not match any known ships in the East India Company's fleet. A shipping log from 1871 simply says, "Structure unsuitable for current craft." It is marked for modification. That modification never comes. Then you start seeing the anomalies not just in the stone, but in the paper. Blueprints that use decorative language to explain industrial scale. Descriptions that frame monumental works as civic improvements. Even when no one uses them, the words collapse under scrutiny. In Amsterdam, a harbor platform built in the early 1800s spans 12 meters and drops directly into deep water. Officials call it a timber barge landing, but the scale is wrong. Timber barges of that era used light wooden piers, not granite. Customs ledgers from the 1830s record cargo and destinations, but leave the column for vessel type blank. Not once, dozens of times, as if the clerks knew better than to name what they saw. The same omission repeats in Marseilles. A stone quay built with stairs and iron mooring points sits abandoned by the 1860s. The rings are spaced 4 meters apart, far wider than needed for Mediterranean vessels of the time. A naval engineer is assigned to assess its value. His report, dated 1867, reads, Structure designed for craft of considerable beam, no such vessels currently operate in this region. There is no final page. Instead, someone writes in different ink in the margin, assessment superseded, no further action. The file ends there. In city after city, the trail leads to the same strange intersection. Massive stonework without an official purpose, records edited to remove the unusual, and photographs or plans that vanish from archives. These places span continents: Alexandria, Amsterdam, St. Petersburg, Odessa, Mumbai, Marseilles. In each case, the infrastructure is overbuilt, the materials are imported, and the function is never convincingly explained. And in each case, someone tried to write the structure out of memory, not by denying its existence, but by pretending it had no mystery. Then the physical details start to echo each other: the width of the stairs, the depth of the platforms, the spacing of the rings. They begin to align, as if built to a single standard, not adapted locally, not responding to climate or coastline, but imposed from a template. The stairs are not just similar, they are practically identical. And once you accept that, the story shifts from confusion to coordination. These were not scattered mistakes. They were deliberate, planned, global. Someone built these structures to serve a purpose that no longer exists, or one we are no longer told about. Now, consider the implications. The logistics of building just one of these stairways would have been immense. Cutting and placing blocks of granite that weigh multiple tons each, aligning them with precision so tight that even modern concrete can't match it, transporting them to harbors with no rail infrastructure at the time, and doing it not once, but over and over across the globe. Who had the means to do this? Who had the knowledge? And more importantly, who had the reason? These are not the works of independent city councils improvising for beauty or convenience. They are the remnants of something coordinated, something that spanned continents and centuries, and whatever it was, it left behind no empire, no flag, no language, only stone, only silence. In some cities, even the surrounding buildings seem younger than the stairs. In Trieste, the waterfront steps appear beneath buildings dated decades later. In Stockholm, the lock system hides older layers beneath renovations, layers with no record in the city's history. In Alexandria, the modern harbor sits on top of stairs no one claims to have built. They are the bones of a vanished infrastructure, buried but not gone, visible but unacknowledged. And here is where the unease sharpens into suspicion, because forgetting can happen by accident. But this feels engineered, records edited, reports cut short, terminology softened until it means nothing. And always the same conclusion: the stairs are just decorative. The platforms are just quaint. The rings are just old iron. And yet, no ships come, no cargo moves. The structures stand, unused and unmatched. The clues point in one direction: a vast, forgotten system. Not forgotten because time wore it down, but because someone worked very hard to forget it. Each stairway is a scar in the narrative, a question that doesn't fit the answer. Each photograph that's retouched, each journal crossed out, each label changed is another brushstroke hiding what once was there. And if that system truly existed, the erasure is not just of stone and steel, it's of memory. The names are gone, the ships are gone, the plans are gone, but the pattern remains. Because stone doesn't lie, because geometry doesn't forget, because even silence has a shape. If these colossal stairways were part of a functioning maritime system, then there should be records. Paperwork is the nervous system of any port. Ledgers, cargo logs, customs forms, engineering blueprints. Ports are not built in silence. They speak in paperwork, in tonnage reports, in shipping manifests that spell out what came, what left, what paid, what owed. So where are the records? Who signed the orders? Who loaded the crates? And why do the archives go silent exactly where the stone begins to speak? We begin in Liverpool, a city whose shipping legacy is documented to the decimal. In the year 1843, the Albert Dock opened to great fanfare. It was hailed as a marvel of industrial Britain, a symbol of global trade. Newspapers described it as the new heart of empire. Engineers lauded its innovative design, but behind the headlines, as always, is the quieter story, the ink and paper that tracked every ship, every crate, every barrel, or should have. In the 1970s, a researcher requested access to Liverpool's original shipping records from the 1840s. What arrived was not a complete archive, but a jigsaw puzzle missing crucial pieces. Entire months were gone. Most of the years 1844 and 1845 showed clean gaps where documents had once been bound. The archive's note blamed water damage, but the remaining pages were clean, crisp, unstained, no mold, no warping, just gone, not lost, selected. The same strangeness emerges in Amsterdam. There, the Stuurdock, a massive granite platform from the early 1800s, was officially labeled as a timber loading dock. But timber barges at that time needed no such structure. Their hulls were shallow, their weight light. They docked at simple wooden piers, not grand stone stages. The customs ledgers remain intact. Almost. A Dutch historian writing in the 1960s noted an oddity. For 3 years during the 1830s, the column for vessel type is left blank in dozens of entries. Cargo is listed. Port of origin and destination is written. But the ships, not named, not described, as if naming them risked something the clerks understood too well to write down. In Marseilles, the silence grows louder. The stone quay near the old port is fitted with mooring rings that defy explanation. 4 meters apart. Far too wide for the Mediterranean vessels of the era. A naval engineer in 1867 conducted a structural assessment. His notes, fragmentary but blunt, described the quay as designed for craft of considerable beam. He added, "No such vessels currently operate in this region." And then, abruptly, the report stops. The final page is missing. In the margin, someone later scrawled, "Assessment superseded. No further action." No one ever says what superseded it. The file ends. The stone remains. Hamburg, 1911. A fire breaks out at the customs house. The official explanation is simple, an electrical fault. But the flames damage only one section of the building, the vault holding shipping manifests from the 1820s through the 1850s. A clerk's personal diary discovered decades later adds an unsettling detail. The fire began in the restricted vault. Only the oldest ledgers burned, the rest untouched. He adds one more sentence, and it sits like a knife in the chest. We were told not to investigate. The physical damage was narrow, surgical. The loss was absolute. A pattern emerges. Records vanish in the same decades the stone platforms were busiest. Where the stairs are widest, the ledgers are thinnest. Where the mooring rings are largest, the paper trail is smallest. These are not natural losses. These are not misfilings or forgotten boxes. These are surgical removals, precise, intentional, and consistent. In archives around the world, the story repeats. Pages are missing, reports stop short. Not everything disappears, just the pieces that ask the wrong questions. And the silences always fall across the same kind of entry. What docked? What was carried? What ship arrived at those impossible staircases? The pattern sharpens when we look at what remains. In most of these places, someone eventually steps in with a replacement narrative. The stairs were scenic. The platforms were public works. The docks were never used. But these explanations don't just appear, they replace something else. We see it in old maps where harbor structures are relabeled, in guidebooks where the word commercial becomes heritage, in engineering logs where structural load becomes aesthetic feature. The language shifts not to clarify, but to obscure. In many cases, the rewritten versions are sloppier than the originals. A stairway designed to bear the weight of several tons is called ornamental. A platform set 12 meters below the tide line is labeled public access. Even though no path ever led there, the replacement stories are not convincing, but they don't need to be. They only need to be official. This is not just a loss of memory, it is a loss of accountability. Because if the record had been left intact, we could follow the trail. We could ask who funded the construction, who approved the plans, who received the cargo. But when the paper vanishes, all that remains is stone, and stone speaks a language that most refuse to hear. And yet, fragments survive. A receipt folded into an old shipping trunk, a sketch on the back of a sermon in a church archive, a line in a diary from a harbor master who had questions, and no one to answer them. These are not grand revelations, but they are stubborn. They are enough to say, the silence is not total, the erasure was not perfect, the stone was meant to outlast the paper, and it has. So we begin to see the true nature of the mystery, not just what is missing, but how it went missing, not just the scale of the stairways, but the precision of the gaps in the record, the missing months, the absent pages, the misfiled blueprints, the redacted diagrams. This is not the chaos of time. It is the choreography of concealment. And when you recognize the choreography, the question changes. It's no longer, why don't we know? It becomes, who decided we shouldn't? Stone can be silenced with concrete. Paper can be burned or shredded. Photographs can be retouched, and blueprints can be buried beneath bland bureaucratic language. But memory is stubborn. It hides in the corners of old letters, clings to the margins of journals, slips into stories told at the end of long shifts, while governments reclassify and erase, while archivists misfile and scholars are redirected. The workers, the ones who lifted the crates, tied the knots, watch the waters. Remember, not in official histories, but in fragments, whispered and scribbled, passed down not through institutions, but through families. These men had no reason to lie, no theory to defend, no agenda. They simply saw something, and sometimes they wrote it down. Trieste, 1856. A dock worker named Enzo Marin kept a small, battered journal. His entries were short, functional, weather reports, shift hours, occasional remarks about cargo weight, but one page stands out. It describes loading crates onto a ship at the city's main quay, a staircase that sloped steeply into the Adriatic. He notes that 3 men were needed to carry each crate, not just because of the weight, but because of the width, the steps. He writes, too wide for one man, too heavy for one hand. He wonders aloud who these steps were meant for. Then he sees the ship. He doesn't recognize it. He describes it as low in the water, wide as a building, no smoke. And then, more curiously, I could see the deck hummed. He uses the word twice, like bees inside metal. It is the only metaphor he can find. He describes the crates as sealed, with strange symbols burned into their sides. No stamps, no customs marks, no paperwork. No one weighed them. No one asked questions. And then he adds the line that makes the air go still. Told not to speak of the gray ship. Paid double. I will not write of this again. And he doesn't. That ship never appears in his journal again. In Boston, 8,000 kilometers away and 33 years later, a longshoreman named Patrick Dolan gave testimony during a labor dispute in 1889. The bulk of his statement focused on hours and injuries. But buried within the transcript was an odd aside, too strange for the newspaper to print, but still preserved in the court's box of unpublished records. Dolan recounts a night shift in the winter of 1881. A ship docked without warning. It had no lights. It moved in silence. It pulled alongside an old stone platform long considered obsolete. Dolan said it sat in the water like it was part of the water. The crew, he claimed, barely spoke. They used no ropes, yet the crates lifted themselves. His foreman sent him home early, with full pay and no questions. A quiet reward for a man willing to stay quiet. Dolan adds only one more line on the subject. I asked once what that ship was. Never got an answer. Never saw it again. And that's where his memory ends. But that sentence says more than it seems. Not just what was seen, but what was unseeable, what was made unmentionable. Gdansk, 1872. A letter surfaces in a church collection, written by a stonemason to his brother in Krakow. He was hired to repair one of the city's waterfront stairs. In the letter, he writes that the granite blocks arrived already cut. His job, he says, was more ceremonial than functional. The stones knew their place before we touched them. He describes grooves at the waterline, carved into the platform in evenly spaced intervals. The foreman claimed they were for drainage, but the mason points out the obvious flaw. Water does not flow uphill. Then he ends the letter with a quiet, unsettling question. Who built the first layer? It was already there when we arrived. Again and again, these voices appear not in archives, but in attics, not in museums, but in private hands. A note in a family Bible, a scribbled margin in a ledger, a folded page tucked into the sleeve of an old coat. The fragments are scattered, unpolished, often ungrammatical, but they echo, they rhyme, they repeat. Each worker describes the same things: stairways built for beings taller, wider, heavier, crates with unknown markings, ships that moved silently, that left no record, that defied classification, equipment that didn't follow the laws of pulleys and ropes, crewmen who didn't speak, orders to forget, payments to stay silent. None of these men were famous. None of them gained from the stories they told. Most didn't even intend to tell them. These were quiet confessions, not declarations, the kind of details you write down only once, then hide. And yet they survived, not because of grand conspiracy, but because someone, years later, opened a drawer, unfolded a note, and decided not to throw it away. And the implications are enormous. If these men told the truth, and their consistency suggests they did, then these stairways weren't just for stone. They weren't just decorative. They were used recently, repeatedly, and not for sailing ships or fishing boats, but for something else, something wider than a building, something that hummed, something that paid well to remain invisible. The language of memory is not always precise. It is often rough, emotional, full of metaphor. But that is also what makes it harder to fake. Engineers might embellish, politicians might rewrite, but dock workers write what they saw. They don't speculate. They describe, and their descriptions are too strange to invent, too consistent to ignore. We are told that history is written by the victors, but sometimes history is remembered by the invisible, by the men who carried crates they weren't allowed to open, by the stonemasons who fit blocks they weren't allowed to measure, by the longshoremen who watched ships arrive with no flag, no name, and no explanation. When the archives burn and the blueprints vanish, when the photographs are retouched and the reports are sealed, these memories remain, not as proof, perhaps, but as resistance. The stairs may be covered, the docks may be demolished, but someone always remembers what they were told to forget. And now that we've listened to their words, we begin to understand that these workers were not alone. They were part of something bigger, an unseen network of witnesses, each guarding a piece of a story they were never supposed to tell. Paper is easy to manipulate. It can vanish quietly, burn cleanly, be rewritten without a sound. But some documents resist erasure not because of what they say, but because of what they shouldn't know. In dusty archives and forgotten folders, blueprints have surfaced, technical drawings that should not exist, because the techniques they reference had not yet been invented. Calculations made decades too early, engineering concepts out of place in their time. These aren't rumors or blurry photos. They are measurements, diagrams, drafts. They speak in the language of precision, and their testimony cannot be dismissed. Vienna, 1923. A young archivist cataloging engineering documents for a recently dissolved shipping firm opens a folder labeled simply ornamental stonework. Expecting decorative flourishes, he finds instead a full set of detailed plans for a waterfront stairway. The schematics include stress calculations, mooring specifications, and load-bearing formulas. This is not architecture for beauty. This is infrastructure for function. The dimensions on the drawing match almost exactly the massive stairways in Odessa, 3.4 meters wide, each block measured to the centimeter. But something is wrong. The plans are dated 1847, yet the formulas used to describe anchoring stress and structural load wouldn't enter mainstream engineering textbooks for another 40 years. Even the phrasing on the blueprints feels too modern. The archivist flags the file for expert review. A week later, the folder is gone, not misfiled, removed. When he inquires, he receives no answer, just silence, the kind that tells you to stop asking. Years later, a single photograph of one page appears in a niche Austrian engineering journal. It is labeled a curiosity. No deeper explanation is offered. But anyone familiar with the Odessa site sees the truth immediately. The drawing is a match, not a copy, not a variation, but a blueprint in the literal sense. The structure in stone was preceded by the structure on paper. But who drafted it, and how did they use methods that shouldn't yet exist? Paris, 1864, In the archives of the École des Ponts et Chaussées, France's elite engineering school, a student submits a thesis proposing a new type of quay. His design includes wide granite steps descending into a platform embedded with metal channels. He theorizes that these channels would absorb and redirect what he calls vibrational load, a term not widely understood at the time. He describes docking impacts not as static weight, but as distributed energy, a concept that would not become standard until well into the next century. His proposal is rejected. The committee calls it fanciful, unworkable, premature. The student disappears from the academic record. No graduation, no further projects, but his thesis survives, only because it ends up in a private collection. Decades later, a researcher finds it. Scrawled across the cover in handwriting that doesn't match the student's is a cryptic note, copied from older source, origin unknown. The design is nearly identical to a real quay built in Marseilles 14 years later. No attribution, no reference, no record of the student's influence, yet the stone matches the drawing precisely. St. Petersburg, 1901. An engineer named Dmitry Volkov submits a formal proposal to the Imperial Technical Commission. His goal? Investigate the granite embankments along the Neva River. His suspicion? The stonework is older than its construction dates suggest. He is not a theorist. He is a structural analyst. He uses tools. He measures. And what he finds beneath the surface stuns him. An older foundation, cut with greater precision than the surface stones. Blocks fitted without mortar. Dimensions that do not match Russian imperial standards. He writes, "What we see is a renovation. The foundation is of unknown origin and considerable age." His report is ignored. Funding withdrawn. No answer is given. But a colleague later recalls that Volkov believed all their engineering models, everything they had learned, were based on copied work. That someone, somewhere, had built first, built better, and left no name behind. These blueprints, these forbidden papers, share more than just strange dates. They share a language. Their geometry aligns. Their calculations echo each other, whether found in Vienna or Paris, in private thesis or engineering firm. The angles match, the proportions hold, the mooring spacing repeats. This is not parallel invention. This is repetition. This is standardization, across time, across borders, across languages. What makes this more chilling is what happens to the people who find them. The student in Paris, erased. Volkov in St. Petersburg, silenced. The Vienna archivist, ignored and discouraged. The pattern continues. Discovery, recognition, suppression, not public denial, private dismissal, a slow, subtle pressure to let it go, to leave it alone. And yet, the drawings persist, not in official archives, but in back copies of obscure journals, in attics, in collections mislabeled as decorative, ornamental, trivial. They wait, like the stairs themselves, for someone to notice that the precision is too precise, the design too advanced, the similarity too exact. Engineering does not lie. A block placed at a wrong angle will fall. A formula that does not match reality will crack. These documents speak truth through numbers, and the numbers are impossible to ignore. Consider this. If one blueprint was early, perhaps it was a genius ahead of his time. If two, perhaps coincidence. But 3, 4, a dozen scattered across Europe, all showing the same measurements, the same unknown techniques, the same structural logic, then it becomes something else. Then it becomes a system. If these stairways and platforms were designed to a shared specification, then someone had to issue that standard. Someone had to enforce it. And yet, no name appears. No empire claims the invention. No textbook cites the method. The knowledge existed. The math was right. The designs were executed. But the authors were erased. We are left with documents that should not exist, and structures that should not stand. And yet, both remain. Not acknowledged, not explained, but undeniable. They are the ghost blueprints of a vanished world, designed for ships we no longer see, bearing the fingerprints of minds we no longer remember. For a while, it all feels disconnected. Stone stairways in faraway cities, erased records, blueprints written in a language too advanced for their time. But every pattern, once recognized, demands a map. If these waterfronts were truly part of something larger, an infrastructure, a network, then their placements should not be random. They should line up, not by chance, but by design. And that's when the next layer of the mystery surfaces, quietly. Repeatedly, a trio of maps appears, created decades and continents apart, none known to the others, and yet all pointing to the same inescapable truth. These waterfronts were connected. The first surfaced in London in the year 1934. A retired naval cartographer named William Hessler donated his personal archives to a maritime museum. Among his neatly drawn charts and navigation tools was a folder marked "Only Personal Research, Not for Display." Inside was a hand-drawn map of Europe and the surrounding seas, coastlines traced in confident black ink, cities marked with black dots: Odessa, Trieste, Hamburg, Marseilles, Gdansk, Alexandria. But a closer look reveals something more. Certain cities are circled in red. Red lines stretch between them, weaving a geometric web that spans from the Baltic to the Black Sea, from Lisbon to Istanbul. His notes clipped to the map state, spacing is not random. Average distance between nodes, 340 nautical miles. Variation, less than 5%. This is not coincidence. And then, a final line. Underlined, I do not know what the lines represent, but something connected these places. Something that required precision. The museum does not display the map. It is labeled speculative. It sits in a drawer, unseen, until decades later when a visiting researcher notices the red circles align with known locations of massive, anomalous waterfront stairways. At first, it seems absurd, but the distances hold, the geometry holds, the network whispers. Half a world away, in the Soviet Union of the 1960s, a geologist running routine magnetic surveys along the Volga River encounters something odd. Weak but consistent anomalies, subtle shifts in the Earth's magnetic field, occur near specific points. At first, he assumes natural causes, but when he plots the anomalies on a map, something impossible begins to appear. The magnetic points trace a line that does not follow the natural river bends. They trace a straight path, one that mirrors the spacing of Hessler's red circles. When he compares the locations to historical maps, he finds old stone embankments in every place the anomalies appear. The structures were built long before the Soviet era. His report, filed with the Ministry of Geology, is marked with a brief handwritten comment. Correlation noted. No further investigation authorized. He keeps a private copy of the data. Years later, after his death, his daughter discovers it folded among his papers. She overlays it with a scanned version of Hessler's map. The matches are undeniable. The red lines and the magnetic anomalies fall into place like puzzle pieces. Different data, different discipline, same pattern. The implication is simple and staggering. Whatever connected these cities, it left a physical trace, not just in stone, but in the very field of the earth beneath them. Then comes the third map, Istanbul, 1978. A student researching Ottoman harbor records finds a chart fragment tucked inside an 18th century ledger. It is not part of the ledger. The paper is older. The ink is different. The style does not match Ottoman mapping techniques, but the geometry is precise. The Bosphorus is drawn with accuracy beyond its time. Certain points along the shore are marked with a strange symbol, a circle. Inside it, a smaller circle, with radial lines extending outward like the spokes of a wheel. She checks the marked locations. Each one aligns with a stone quay, a stairway, or a platform of unknown origin, structures the Ottomans inherited but never claimed to have built. The fragment is photographed and returned to the archive. Months later, when the student requests the ledger again, the chart is gone. The staff claim it was never part of the collection, but the photograph survives. Years later, it resurfaces online, briefly, before disappearing again into the noise of the internet. Those who see it recognize the symbol. It matches one found etched into a stone fragment salvaged from a buried platform in Valletta. A circle within a circle, radiating lines. It is not a decorative motif. It is a coordinate system, a node marker, a key. These three maps, drawn by different hands, in different countries, for different purposes, converge on the same invisible structure. They do not share language, culture, or origin, and yet they map the same network. Each data point confirms the next. Hessler's spacing, the geologist's magnetic echoes, the Istanbul student's charted symbols. None of them knew about the others, and yet, all three map the same design. This is not folklore. This is not imagination. These are trained observers, experts in navigation, geology, and archival analysis. Their findings are not theories. They are measurements, coordinates, data, and what they point to is not an idea, but an infrastructure. If the waterfront stairways were part of a connected system, then their alignment was no accident. Someone built them according to a master plan. Someone calculated the distances. Someone defined the nodes. But no empire claimed it. No engineer signed the drawings. No textbook records the methodology. The system is visible only in fragments, traced through geometry, not history. And what does it mean? A system that spans continents, constructed with surgical consistency, hidden beneath centuries of noise. A network of harbors that require no ships, platforms that no one remembers using, grooves designed for machines that no museum displays. It means we are not looking at scattered ruins. We are standing on the ghost grid of a forgotten civilization. If the network was real, and every shred of evidence says it was, then its erasure was not a byproduct of time. It was deliberate. You don't hide something this vast by accident. You hide it by plan. These maps are the first to say it clearly. The waterfronts were not isolated. They were designed together, built together, and buried together. They are the bones of a vanished system. And the more maps we find, the more complete the skeleton becomes. The network once stretched across continents, tied together by mathematics, engineering, and purpose. And then, it vanished. Not all at once. Not in a single act of destruction, but step by step, methodically, patiently, silently. The structures were not merely abandoned or left to decay. They were dismantled, misnamed, buried, and, in many cases, deliberately erased. The language of the erasure was not violence, but policy. Not fire and hammer, but paper, ink, and silence. Paris. 1871. The Franco-Prussian War ends, and the French state begins to rebuild its infrastructure. Roads, bridges, harbors, all are catalogued and assessed. Within the internal files of one commission, a quiet memorandum circulates. It is not meant for public release. It is marked for administrative use only. The memo targets specific waterfront structures along the Atlantic and Mediterranean coasts. Its recommendation is not to repair, not to repurpose, but to reclassify. These stairways, massive, moored, and monumental, are to be labeled not as infrastructure, but as heritage monuments, scenic promenades, or non-functional remnants. The language is careful. The reasons are vague. The phrasing reads, alignment with modern vessel standards, optimization of naval logistics, enhancement of public space aesthetics. But in the margins, someone writes a more honest sentence. These structures invite questions we are not prepared to answer, reclassify, reduce visibility, and so it begins. Within a decade, these stairways vanish from maritime maps. Civilian planners rename them. The mooring rings remain, but ships are no longer permitted to use them. The stone remains. The purpose disappears. St. Petersburg, post-1917. The Russian Revolution sweeps away the imperial order. The new Soviet government inherits centuries of infrastructure and must decide what to keep. In 1924, a report is issued assessing the granite embankments along the Neva River. The language is blunt. Pre-revolutionary excess, non-essential, recommend repurposing. Crews are dispatched to dismantle portions of the waterfront. Some stone is salvaged for housing projects. But in 1926, something halts the work. One crew, tasked with removing a lower platform, finds metal fixtures embedded beneath the granite, copper rods, hollow channels, metallic plates lined with an unknown alloy. The foreman files a report. The supervisor responds with a single sentence. Cease excavation, seal the site, no documentation required. Concrete is poured. The granite face remains for aesthetics. The structure underneath is buried. Not studied, not preserved, sealed, New York, 1938. The city launches a waterfront modernization campaign. Old piers come down. New terminals rise. Among the scheduled demolitions is a stone staircase at Manhattan's southern edge, long disused, mostly underwater except at the lowest tides. A historical preservation society petitions for a delay. They argue that the structure predates modern port planning and may hold archaeological value. The city denies the request. No public photographs are taken. The demolition lasts 3 days. The stone is trucked to a landfill in New Jersey. Decades later, a letter from the Port Authority is found in a private collection. It explains the rationale for removal in a single, chilling line. Structure inconsistent with modern maritime standards. Retention would invite speculation regarding original use. Not cost, not safety, not necessity. Speculation. The true threat was not what the stairs could do, but what they might make people ask. Across countries, languages, political systems, the actions are the same. Reclassify, demolish, seal, disappear. Paris, St. Petersburg, New York. 3 cities with nothing in common but the decision to erase. It is as if someone, somewhere, issued a silent directive. These structures must not be allowed to exist in memory. And yet, not every erasure is perfect. Some workers refuse to look away. Some engineers write personal notes. Some preservationists sketch before the bulldozers arrive. These fragments accumulate. They do not form a full picture, but they form a shadow. Vienna, 1919. The Habsburg Empire has collapsed. Bureaucracy splinters. Within the remnants of the maritime administration, a brief directive is issued, all non-standard mooring structures along the Adriatic to be decommissioned, materials to be repurposed, no documentation required. A clerk adds a pencil question in the margin. What is non-standard? There is no answer, but the crews understand. The stairs that don't match current ship dimensions, the platforms that bear grooves of unknown use, the structures that don't fit the story. Those are the targets. In Lisbon, 1861, a storm damages a harbor stairway. The structure is declared unstable. Within months, it is demolished. The replacement is wooden, temporary, simple, clearly inferior. No effort is made to match the original scale or material. The old granite disappears. In Alexandria, 1853, an earthquake strikes. The damage is moderate. The response is not. The waterfront is reconstructed hastily. The old platforms are not repaired. They are buried. New ones are built over them. Smaller, simpler, shallower. The records from the older harbor vanish shortly after. In Hamburg, the fire of 1911 destroys the archive. In St. Petersburg, the concrete seals the foundation. In New York, the demolition clears the memory. Each city has its excuse: war, weather, progress. But the pattern remains. The same kind of structure disappears, again and again, at moments when questions might arise. The danger was never in the stone. The stairs were not going to rise up and threaten governments. The threat was in the questions they provoked. Who built this? For what? Why is there no record? And why does it repeat across oceans? To erase an idea, you must erase its evidence. And to erase evidence, you must do more than destroy. You must replace, rename, reframe, recast the stairs as art, the platforms as promenades, the grooves as rain channels. If possible, cover them. If not, redefine them. And if neither works, demolish them in silence. By the mid-20th century, most of the network has been buried or sealed, but some structures resist. Too large, too central, too embedded in the city to remove. These survive, not by design, but by oversight, inertia, luck. A stairway covered by a park, a platform encased beneath a modern plaza. They remain like fossils, like scars, waiting. What began as an infrastructure becomes an echo, a shape in the stone, a weight in the ground. The network does not vanish completely, it recedes. But stone is stubborn. Memory is persistent, and even silence leaves fingerprints. Not all of the network was erased. Not every stairway was demolished. Not every platform was buried beneath shopping centers or rebranded as a public promenade. Some pieces escaped. Some resisted demolition by being too embedded in the modern city, too costly to remove, or simply forgotten in their obscurity. And in these places, hidden under buildings, beneath metro lines, behind warehouse walls, the stone remains, and so do the memories. While governments sealed off what they could, while commissions reassigned meaning and maps redrew the coastline, people still found ways to remember. They drew, they sketched, they saved scraps of truth. They became the silent resistance to forgetting. Valletta, Malta, 1952. A construction crew expanding a portside warehouse breaks through what they assume is a natural shelf of limestone. Instead, they find a stepped platform, cut with sharp precision, descending toward the Grand Harbor. The steps are massive, smooth, and deeply worn. At the lowest level, they find embedded iron fixtures, too rusted to use, but unmistakable in purpose. Mooring points, yes, but scaled for something much larger than any known vessel in Malta's shipping history. The foreman calls in the port authority. A supervisor arrives, takes a few photographs, says nothing, and leaves. The next morning, concrete trucks arrive. The order is simple: fill it in. The stairway is buried in silence. But one of the workers, sensing something important is being lost, pockets a stone fragment with a strange carving, a circle within a circle, radiating lines. He keeps it in his home. His grandson, decades later, posts a photo of it online. At the time, no one understands what they're seeing. Not yet. Not until similar symbols are found again. In Stockholm, during renovations of the Slussen Lock in the 1980s, engineers working to reinforce older structures stumble on a deeper layer. Beneath the known 18th century stonework is something stranger. Granite blocks, unmortared, perfectly fitted. Too large for standard construction, too smooth for the tools of the supposed era. The discovery is not announced, no press release, no publication. One of the engineers, troubled by what they uncovered, makes personal notes. He writes, "We found stairs going down to a level that should not exist. The water level was wrong. The measurements did not fit. The construction continues. The older layers are sealed in concrete. But the engineer tells his children. They tell theirs. And so, the knowledge escapes the seal, passed through mouths instead of maps." Buenos Aires, 1971. A sudden flood in the old port district recedes, revealing damage to a section of embankment. When it collapses, it exposes something unexpected: a stairway built of granite. Unlike any other structure nearby, the platform at its base is curved, packed with sediment, and embedded with horizontal metal rods. These are not standard anchors. They do not match the maritime hardware of the 19th century. A local archaeologist requests to examine the site. The port authority denies access, citing safety concerns. Within a week, repairs begin. The structure is sealed, but a single photograph leaks, a shot of a groove in the platform, curved with mechanical precision. It does not look like erosion. It looks like design. In his private notes, the archaeologist writes, "This structure was not designed for static mooring. Something moved here. Something turned." The same story plays out again and again. In Naples, 1997, a metro tunnel project cuts beneath a 19th century warehouse. The excavation strikes stone, unexpected, uncharted. It is a staircase, not Roman, not medieval. Too deep, too steep. The workers halt. Engineers arrive. A brief report is filed, mislabeling it as ancient Roman waterworks. Then it is sealed. The metro tunnel curves around it, but a foreman sketches what he saw: steps continuing down into darkness, beneath the waterline, and he notes something chilling. It looked like it was still waiting. In Prague, 2004, a parking garage foundation project uncovers a granite platform beneath 6 meters of soil. It's not in any record. No known construction matches it. The city archaeologist inspects the site and finds the same measurements seen in Buenos Aires, Stockholm, Valletta. The grooves are cut at identical intervals. The mooring points repeat. She submits a formal request for excavation. It is denied, the site is sealed, but she keeps her data. "This city," she later writes, "is built on something older than its history admits." Cairo, 2011. During a period of political upheaval, a collapsed sewer near the old port district opens a cavity beneath the street. A municipal worker takes a photo before repairs begin. It shows a tunnel, stone-lined, carved with strange regularity, and etched with symbols, a circle within a circle, radiating spokes. The photo briefly appears online. It is dismissed, ignored, buried under the noise of the news cycle, but those who have seen the symbols before recognize it. Another node, another forgotten artery of the network. The survivors are few, but they are enough. They tell us that the network was not an isolated myth. They confirm what the erased documents and the sealed blueprints only hinted at, that the infrastructure is still there, beneath the cities, beneath the plazas and parking structures and shopping malls. The stairs remain, entombed in concrete. The grooves remain, buried in mud. The mooring points remain, rusted but unbroken. These are the hidden witnesses of a system that once moved something enormous, and now moves nothing but memory. And the resistance to forgetting didn't just come from construction crews and archaeologists. It came from people. People who paused when they saw something that didn't make sense, who drew what they couldn't explain, who saved scraps of stone and sketches that no one else would care about. They did not stop the erasure, but they slowed it. They planted seeds that would grow decades later. When researchers and curious minds started to see the pattern, not all witnesses were erased. Not all questions were buried. And as long as someone finds a fragment, as long as someone remembers to ask, the silence cannot hold. These survivors, these pieces of stubborn, misplaced stone, remind us that history does not vanish completely. It recedes. It hides. It waits. And sometimes, it resurfaces through accident, through curiosity, or through the quiet defiance of someone who refuses to look away. Even when stories are hidden, documents destroyed, and structures buried, geometry remains. Measurements do not forget. Angles do not lie. And in the absence of names, dates, or declarations, the physical consistency of a structure across time and space speaks a truth no institution can erase. That is where Etienne Roux comes in, a civil engineer from Geneva, working alone, with no university funding, no institutional backing, and no career to threaten. From 2003 to 2010, Roux visits 19 cities, measuring ancient waterfront stairways, platforms, and mooring structures others have dismissed as curiosities. His data is precise, his method simple, and what he uncovers is astonishing. In Odessa, the Great Stairway measures exactly 3.4 meters in width. In Trieste, the same. In Hamburg, Marseilles, Valletta, Stockholm, again, the same. Across cities, continents, centuries, and building materials, the variation is less than 2 centimeters. Roux calculates the probability of this occurring by chance. The result is mathematically insignificant. It is not chance. It is standardization. Someone at some point issued a specification. Someone enforced it. And that is not the only constant. The mooring rings, those massive iron fixtures embedded in stone, are consistently spaced 4.2 meters apart. The grooves carved into platforms, often dismissed as decorative or for drainage, follow a recurring arc, 1.8 meters in radius, with smooth curvature and consistent depth. The stairs descend at a perfect 12 degrees angle, repeated, exact, unquestioned. Roux writes in his unpublished manuscript, "This is not architecture. This is engineering to a global specification. Someone designed this system. Someone maintained it." He notes that the elevation of the platforms relative to sea level is not arbitrary. All structures appear calibrated to a specific oceanic mean, one that matches historical sea levels approximately 400 years ago, not current tides, not local geography, a global baseline, consistent, repeating, intentionally aligned. Meanwhile, in Lisbon, independent surveyor Ana Ferrer runs her own measurements on the old quay near Belém, comparing it to platforms in Alexandria, Mumbai, and Buenos Aires. She finds the same ratios, identical spacing, matching angles. She writes to a colleague, "I do not know who built these, but I know they were connected. The geometry does not lie. Her data corroborates Roux's, independently confirmed, repeated, undeniable, when angles, proportions, widths, and placements remain identical across cultures and centuries, across empires that never claimed contact. The conclusion becomes inescapable. These structures were part of a single system, not local flourishes, not artistic echoes, a network, engineered with purpose, consistency, and precision that modern infrastructure rarely achieves. But to what end? The size of the stairs, their impossible width, their exaggerated depth, was never for pedestrians. The mooring rings, massive, deeply set, were never meant for ropes that modern ships used. The platforms, reinforced, grooved, and precisely placed, were not made for leisure or aesthetics. They were built to endure, to carry weight, to absorb movement. Something used them, something large, something heavy, something gone. In Sevastopol, 1879, a naval engineer studying the harbor's old stone quay calculates its load-bearing capacity. His conclusion? It could support a vessel of 8,000 tons displacement. No ship in any known fleet matched that number. He writes a question in his report. For whom was this built, and when? The report is filed away. The question never answered. In Cardiff, Wales, 1912, another engineer finds that the grooves in the port's granite platform are not aligned for vertical lifting or mooring, but for lateral motion, for something that rotated, slid, something that moved differently than any ship he had seen. He writes in his personal journal, "This was not a dock for ships. This was a dock for machines." The speculation begins to build. If these were docks, what docked there? Fishermen didn't need this scale. Military ships didn't require these dimensions. Trade vessels, even the largest, didn't need reinforced platforms with channel grooves. Something else moved through these harbors, something that left no hulls, no flags, no anchors, but left behind geometry. The researchers who pushed too far, Roux, Ferrer, Volkoff, Brenner, Cole, all reached the same threshold. The data says yes, the records say nothing. And once the questions begin to gather weight, the answers vanish. Silence follows. Was it a civilization lost to time, one that engineered harbors across the globe, then disappeared before written history could mark their name? Was it a technological society whose infrastructure was inherited and repurposed without understanding, only to be sealed once the mismatch became too obvious? Or was it something else, something stranger? Because the testimonies of workers still hover at the edge of this geometry. The journals of Enzo Marin, Patrick Dolan, the Gdansk stonemason, all speak of ships that defied classification. Wide, low, silent, crates that levitated, decks that hummed, shapes that didn't cast normal shadows, arrivals that brought no paperwork, departures that left no wake. And then there are the clues even more unsettling. The magnetic anomalies near the Volga, aligning with the same coordinates as Hessler's hand-drawn red lines. The symbol found in Istanbul and Malta, a circle within a circle with radiating spokes, etched into stone, hidden in maps, forgotten in ledgers, a symbol not attached to any known language, but present wherever the network leaks through. Perhaps these docks served more than trade. Perhaps they moved more than cargo. Perhaps what docked here wasn't built for water, but for vibration, for rotation, for something that interacted with energy in ways we no longer understand. What destroyed it? What dismantled this global network? Earthquakes, wars, time, or was it removed piece by piece because of what it implied, because of the questions it forced people to ask? Who built it? What did it carry? And why were we never supposed to know? Because one thing is certain. This was not decay. This was not neglect. The sealed stairways, the buried grooves, the missing blueprints, the rewritten documents. These were not accidents. They were choices. Roux ends his manuscript with a sentence that feels both like a whisper and a warning. The stairs still wait. What they waited for is gone, or it isn't.